So module 0, course introduction. So let's talk about this, because this is going to lay out what we're going to be looking at for the next couple days. So the main idea here is that we want to learn and apply, right, the machine learning pipeline mainly to SageMaker. That's going to be the experience that we're going to have. Now, we're not going to use SageMaker Edge or Ground Truth, although we'll talk about Ground Truth, or Neo Inference. We're not, it's mainly the core stuff around SageMaker. This is, remember, this is a primer class. It's the beginning class about SageMaker and how it relates to machine learning. We are going to be touching SageMaker, which is that icon up top. And then we're going to be touching Jupyter Notebooks and Python. If you are not comfortable with Python, you're going to have an exceptionally hard time in this class. It is a prerequisite. Now, do you need to be a feature programmer? No, and I bet you if I pulled a bunch of data scientists aside, they're like, I'm not really a feature programmer. They probably say the same thing, right? But if you're not comfortable, understanding data types and declaring variables and defining functions, and importing library, if you don't know modules, you don't know how that functions, then you're gonna have a tough time. This is not gonna be a fun class for you. It's gonna be horrible. Okay, so you've been warned that if you decide to stay and you don't meet the prerequisites, that's going to be on you. I'm just going to say this right now. I'd love for it to be on me because then I could do something about it. But if you don't know Python, it's going to suck, for the lack of a better word. Okay. So there it is. Basic knowledge of Python, a basic understanding of AWS Cloud. So they do assume that you have a cloud practitioner's level of knowledge of AWS. Right. And just be aware when you take the exam, they assume that you have an architect's level of knowledge of AWS. So this class only requires a cloud practitioner level. But when you take the exam, they're going to ask you questions like how roles work from IAM, right? They're going to ask you questions like, which is faster, EFS, EBS, or S3, right? They're going to ask you questions like that. So don't worry. When we do the exam prep, you're going to get a feel for the things that you need to know, but I just want you to be aware they do it, at least for this class, they expect you to have a cloud practitioner's knowledge of AWS. A basic understanding of how to write code cells and markdown cells in a Jupyter Notebook. If you've never touched a Jupyter Notebook before, this is not going to be a fun class for you. So I just want to be clear about that, is that you are required to have a basic understanding of Python, a basic understanding of AWS, and a baseline understanding of Jupyter Notebooks. Because even though this is a beginner's class, it's a beginner's class to machine learning and SageMaker, which are orders of magnitude above basic AWS infrastructure, okay? So even though it's a software as a service, you are gonna have to have these requirements in order to function in the class. And the main reason is, by the way, is that you're gonna have a project, and don't live in fear of this, because I'm not going to grade your project. There's no grading for the class. Okay. There's no pass fail, but you're going to have a project and you're going to be expected to work on that project predominantly solo. Doesn't mean that I can't help you, right? Because I will 100% help you. I got your back, but I can't teach you Python and I can't teach AWS fundamentals and I can't teach you about Jupyter, and still conduct the class. Unfortunately, I just can't, no one can, right? We have too much material to cover and it's assumed that you have what you need in order to keep up. Okay. So just letting you know, it's a fire hose of a class. You have to have these requirements in order for this class to work for you. Okay. Some of you are out there, you've probably written tons of Python and now you're questioning whether or not you have Python skills. Don't worry, you'll be fine. So we kind of did this one already, which is where we talked about, hey, what do you do? How long you been using AWS? What's your experience with ML? What we didn't talk about is what you wanted to get out of the course. Does anyone know? I didn't really ask that. You know why? Because I assume most of you wanted to basically get some understanding around certification and you wanted to learn a little bit about machine learning and how it worked with AWS and SageMaker. Does anyone have any other objectives that might be a little different from the two that I just stated around understanding the certification and understanding SageMaker and the ML pipeline on AWS? I'm all ears. We'd love to hear it. Or you can write it out. Good. Okay. Well, they're in alignment. If you want something else, let me know. We'll see what we can do to make it happen. But this is primarily what we're here for, is to SageMaker and the ML pipeline, and then all of that, how that can relate to basically not only doing the work, because let me be clear, I'm not a fan of paper certifications, but also how that can help fuel your ability to do the certification. Oh, good. Well, I see that. Yeah. Well enough to help students with research projects. Good. Okay. Good, good, good. Perfect. Okay, so then let's talk about what ideally you at least have a deeper understanding of by the time you finish the course. Because I just want to say that some of this is relatively ambitious. Remember, this is a primer, right? So one, could you use ML? Like, can you figure out what the business problem is and figure out how to solve it with ML? Like, what approach are you actually going to use to solve the problem? That's something that you should have at least a fundamental, like, basic understanding of as we approach this, right? Ideally, you're going to be able to, do exactly what's listed here. And the thing that they left out of this is build, train, evaluate, deploy, and fine tune an ML model in SageMaker. In SageMaker. So we're clear. In SageMaker, because this is a class about SageMaker. This is about how to solve a specific business problem. When they say problem, they're talking about the business problem, right? To apply the steps of the ML pipeline to the business problem. And then describe some of the best practices, for model evaluation, pre-processing, scalability, cost optimization, just so you know that their best practices are going to align with what's called the well-architected framework. They do assume, by the way, that you have an architect's knowledge of AWS when you go to take the exam. If you haven't seen the well-architected framework, or you don't know what AWS's well-architected framework is, you probably want to go Google AWS and well-architected framework and learn. There's now 6 pillars. One of them is called sustainability, but just learn the first 5. Don't worry about sustainability. It just came out, right? And then identifying the steps to apply ML to real business problems, like how do you, tune? How do you feature engineer? How do you do some data augmentation? Although there's not a lot of data augmentation in here. It's like, how do we do the feedback loops in order to make sure that we're applying it to real business problems? Just to say this is that, Jeffrey, there is a whole section, there's a whole module on here on deployment. So we talk about deployment. And just to say this, in your project and in your actual training modules, you will actually deploy at least twice, if I remember correctly. Anyway, I just did this last week. You will deploy a SageMaker. You'll deploy a model at least twice. Okay. Does that sound like we're heading in the right direction? Okay. Good. Okay. Now, I believe it might be today. It's probably going to be more likely tomorrow morning. And you're like, Michael, why are you so vague with the schedule? Because just to say this, the first day is usually the one with the most variability. And sometimes we get to this last little piece and sometimes we have to save it to the morning. So just be flexible with me, because in general, I'm about to show you a general agenda, and just know that our times are going to vary. Plus, this class was designed for in-person setup, and they haven't really changed it for a virtual setup. So there's some major changes and some corrections here. And I didn't want to modify the slides too heavily, because I wanted you to be able to relate them back to the slides that you have. Because if I make changes here, they're not going to be reflected in your student guide. But one thing you need to know is that you are going to work on a project. So you have 3 options. In one project, it's going to be about flight delays and how basically non-catastrophic weather events are going to affect whether or not you're going to be late or not, right? Whether you arrive on time or you're going to be late. The middle one is like you work for Netflix, and that you're basically going to do some recommended content based on, right, customer reviews, right, and customer history. And then fraud detection, where you're going to identify fraudulent activities. Is this, and think of this as like you're working for a credit card company and you're trying to identify fraudulent transactions. So these are the 3 projects that you're going to get to work on. And the cool thing is that starting, I believe, with lab 2, you're going to choose your project, and actually you're going to choose it prior to that. But with lab 2, what's going to happen is that you're going to download a Jupyter notebook, and you're going to be uploading and working with that Jupyter notebook in the SageMaker environment throughout the entire time. Now, don't freak out, because if you're listening to this and you're like, well, I'm not sure that I'm ready for that, we provide the solutions for the project for you. Because the idea here is that we want you to learn about the subject, but if you're like really struggling with it because you don't have that many years yet, or the concept is tough, we actually have the solutions for all the projects for you as well, because we want you to be challenged, but we don't want you to be overwhelmed. So the goal here is that we want you to go try it, learn, try to experiment. If you're like, Michael says we got 2 hours and I'm only like 30% done, then you can grab the solution and bring that in and then move on to the next concept. So just know, and one thing also I'm going to do is by the end of this class, I'm going to show you how to pull the lab out of the lab environment and show you how to pull it into your own personal AWS account so you can run this at any time. And honestly, it'll probably cost you less than $1, maybe $2 a day if you pull this into your own account. So I'm going to show you how to pull the labs out so you can have access to them even out after the class is done. One thing I want everybody to hear me say is that the lab environments that we're going to run this in are all going to be AWS lab environments. You have access to those lab environments for 3 months. 3 months, just in case you weren't paying attention. 3 months. You can run each of the labs 3 times before it's going to block you, and you have 8 hours to run the labs. Okay, at each time you run it. So I just want to make sure you heard me. You're going to have access to the lab environment for this class for 3 months, and you can run each of the labs. So I think there's 4 of them total, but 3 of them are active. You're going to run them 3 times. Okay, three times a piece. So that's exactly right, Jeffrey. Sorry, I'm not sure what you prefer. You not only can you pull this out and pull it into your own account and run it 1,000,000 times if you want to, but in the AWS lab environment, you have access to each of the projects. So if you want to do this run, you want to work on flight delays, and then the next run, you want to do a recommendation engine, and the next run, you want to do fraud detection, you can run it 3 times. Okay. So I hope that's clear. 3 times for every single lab. There's 4 labs. You get to run all the labs 3 times a piece, including what you're going to do in class. Just remember that if you do actually want to run it outside of the lab environment, you need to take one of those times and grab the CloudFormation that I'm going to show you how to grab, because that CloudFormation is going to allow you to run it in your own environment. Okay. So just want to make sure one of those 3 times you're going to need to grab the CloudFormation file. Okay. So I'm going to talk more about the project details here for just a second. 1, flight delays. Okay. Again, reminder, you're working for Delta, right? Or Expedia or Priceline, or, whatever. I don't even know what modern booking sites are now. Wow, I'm like woefully out of touch on that. So you work for a travel booking site and you want to improve the customer experience for people whose flights were delayed. So you want to do notifications, right? If the flights are delayed, I'm going to use ML to do that. The recommendations engine, again, you're working for Amazon Prime or Netflix or Peacock or Disney Plus or whoever, and you want to do recommendations engine based on a user's viewing history. Pretty straightforward. 3rd project, so not flight recommendations, not a video recommendations engine, but fraud detection, right? You're working for a multinational bank. You want to figure out, which of these are credit card fraud and which isn't, right? So again, this is all going to happen in SageMaker on a virtual machine, a SageMaker instance, that's what it's called, right? That you can't see, log into, or touch, and you're going to run your Jupyter notebooks there. They're all going to be executed in Python, and we're going to be touching, pandas and Seaborn and Matplotlib and scikit-learn, right? We're going to be touching some libraries as well. So here is where you're going to get access to things like your student guide, which I think I just talked about. That's the one that's on eVantage. So Bookshelf, right? .vitalsource.com or Gilmore.ca. That was the one where you get access to the student guide. And then you can follow along during training. You can use it as a resource afterwards. So that's available to you. There's also a student project template, and there's an example like project, right? Now, hold on. I think this is in the speaker notes. Hold on one second. Or did I put it in Sublime? I probably put it in Sublime. Hold on just one second. Oh yeah, here it is. So this is the student project template. And this is the example project. And let me talk about this for a second. So I'm going to open both of these so you can see them. So this is the project template. And what happens here is that this is where you could possibly stick notes if you want to grab notes. Like, and this is going to ask you questions to consider. None of this is required to be filled out. I just want you to have it in case you want to take notes. I know a lot of people, by the way, already have their own note-taking system. So they'll use like OneNote or Sublime or Atom or whatever they're using, Evernote, to take notes. The other thing is that here's the example project. And this, by the way, will like give you an example of a false project. So this is a targeted direct marketing campaign. And this is just going to give you some of the possible answers for a legitimate, right? Like a legitimate project. Like, hey, we handled missing values. Now, I'm going to tell you this, is that this is a little light for my purposes. What missing values did you handle, and how did you basically handle it, right? When you say you handled missing values, did you delete rows? Did you delete features / columns out of there? Did you do mean imputation? What formula did you use? So just so you know, it's a little light on details. But regardless, right? It talks about, hey, we decided to use extreme gradient boost, but we could also use linear learner as well, like different things in here. So feel free to use these as, you know, notes, if you will. So note taking for the student project template. The other one's just an example. Okay, so there was the example project and student project template. And I believe, oh, let's talk about this. Okay. So in general, you know that you're going to be doing labs and quick labs. In general, you know that your student guide is going to contain all the slides and notes that I'm going to go through. You now know that somewhere in the next 24 hours, you're probably going to end up picking a project that's either going to be about flight delays, you know, video recommendations, or fraudulent credit card transactions. And again, you don't have to make that decision now. You can even look at the projects later and figure that out if you want to. And that you now know that you have lab access for 3 months, and you're going to get to run each lab 3 times. And that at the end of the day, Michael's going to cover a bunch of exam prep stuff. And then at some point in time, he's going to show you, this guy, right, is going to show you how to pull the labs out of the lab environment so you can run them yourself. So then what are we going to talk about? What are we doing for the next 4 days with this crazy guy? So one, I want you to notice that if you look at this, we're going to do a lab a day. So we're going to do an introduction to SageMaker. We're going to do some data pre-processing. We're going to do model training and evaluation, and we're going to do feature engineering. Now, the only thing is that the things around that might shift, meaning we might push some of the stuff at the end of the day towards the beginning of day 2. Model training might go to the beginning of day 3, but I promise you by day 4, we're going to be done. Okay. By day 4, I promise you we're going to be done, and it's not, we're going to be moving intently through the material, but we're not going to do a speed run. Okay. So this isn't, this isn't a speed run, although it is still pretty intense. One thing I just want to share with you is that this class was originally designed to be in person, and they really haven't shifted it. So one of the parts that used to be in here is that all of you had to publicly present to the rest of your class about the things that you discovered and what was going on in your project and all this other stuff. Now, for some of you, I just said that and you, very few of you were probably very excited about the thought of speaking in front of your peers and sharing out all the details about your project. But most of you probably had a small moment of terror where you're just like, that doesn't sound like fun, right? Now, just so you know, since we moved into pandemic rules, we have not actually been doing the presentation portion of this whole thing. Because one, this isn't a communications class, although communications is extremely important for everybody's IT career. And the other thing is that we need the extra time in the labs. So I'm just going to be upfront about it. We have been avoiding this because when we were in groups and we could like manage that easily, it was real easy to do this. But since basically early 2020, the ML class, we haven't been doing the project share outs. So where it says things like project presentations or final project share out, we haven't been doing that. We've been reclaiming that time for the labs and to slow down the pace of the class just a little bit so it's a little bit more palatable. Okay. If anyone's really, really upset about not being able to do a public presentation of their features and whatever in their project, just know we'll allocate time. I do want to mention that to date, no one's taken me up on that, but I'm willing to do it. Okay. All right. Other things to note. This class has assessments. Now, again, before you clinch all up and get tight, because you just heard me say the word assessments, first of all, the assessments are completely anonymous. Nobody's going to look at them. They are not reported to Booz, Amazon, or really anybody. I can go look in general and see how the entire class did, but you will literally input no personal information. So I have no idea. Unless you, and there's no, it's all multiple choice, so you can't stick anything in there that would identify you. Just know that these assessments are purely for you to know how you are doing with the course. Let me also be clear, these assessments are for the course, they're not for the exam prep. Because I know this sounds weird. There's a whole version of this class. Is that right? Is it of this class? There's a whole version of, there's an exam prep class, an official AWS exam prep class that's like 8 hours long. It doesn't include the stuff that we're going to go through today, but it's basically a speed run through all the material through days 1 through 4 in a single day. So just know that the assessment questions are so you can test your learning of the pipeline and SageMaker. They're not to test your learning of the exam prep stuff. Okay. So we actually are going to do an assessment this morning. A reminder, it's not graded. I can't, like, it's all cool. There's no pressure here. Okay. It's really just to know whether or not you know something or whether you don't know something, just for you. So notice that we're going to do the introduction to the ML and the ML pipeline, and we're going to do an introduction to SageMaker, and then we're going to do a lab for SageMaker. That's all going to happen today. So for the most part, I can guarantee you that we're going to get to the lab 100%. Now, as far as choosing your project and problem formulation and formulating your business problems, we'll get to some of that today. Some of that might happen tomorrow. Okay. And then tomorrow we're going to do data pre-processing. So we're going to talk about a variety of different libraries and how to create data frames and stuff like that in general, and how to do some data pre-processing. We might get to model training tomorrow, but it'll probably honestly be on Wednesday. And then model training, we're going to actually do that. And then, we'll have a checkpoint just like we did on the day before. And then we'll do model evaluation. So notice that we're going to go through model training and model evaluation. And then you're going to have a lab on Wednesday for model training and evaluation. And then we usually get to feature engineering and model tuning on the last day. We do a quick checkpoint, and then we do model, and then you're going to have like the morning to do it, like 2.5 hour lab on feature engineering. And then we're going to talk about model deployment, because you will have already done it twice in your previous like labs 3 and 4. So you'll already have deployed twice already. But we're going to talk about, explain like what you did there so you can understand how to deploy labs. So, and then final is that we're going to do the course wrap up. Okay. So we're going to do the course wrap up at the very end, and then we'll do the final kind of like exam prep and whatnot. Okay. So yeah, absolutely, Jeff, we can do it. And to make it easier, what we can do is maybe towards one of the labs, what I do is I can pull you out to a breakout room, And if people want to come watch the presentation, we can do it. If not, it can just be you, and then you can practice your presentation skills. How's that sound? Or, you know, obviously the technical pieces of that as well. So we'll work that out. Good. Anything here that's a surprise or any questions about anything other than remember the final project shareouts and the project presentations are not going to be done as a group. Okay. Okay, so here it comes. Here's their pre-assessment. This is literally a 45-minute run, but here's the cool thing. It's 9:30. So we're going to throw in an extra 10 minutes there so you can actually do the assessment and whatnot. So, and take a break, right? So, we're going to just make it an hour just to make it easy. So 25 questions, a 45-minute time limit, and we're going to cover everything that we're going to cover. This is a pre-assessment. This is to show you where it is that you're super strong and where it is you're potentially weak. And be aware that some of these, very few of these questions, some of them are from Amazon's perspective. So, but most of these are really clean cut, like as far as like why this answer versus another answer. Okay, so this is the pre-assessment. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to share the pre-assessment so that you can identify areas that you're good at, areas that you're weak at. And then you're going to take the same assessment at the end to show how much you learned about SageMaker and the ML pipeline when we get to the end of the course. Okay. Let's see. I think I have the pre-assessment link already. Yeah. So I'll post this in the chat. When you open this up, it should look like this. In the, what I want you to stick in there is I want you to stick Forrester, which is my last name. That again, just anonymously lets me identify whether or not, like if I need to see like it has a class, how are you all doing, right, in general? And you can actually see the first question, which I'm not going to answer for you. Okay. So that's what we're going to do for the next hour. And you're going to take a 10 or 15 minute break once you're done. But we're going to come back at 10:30. I'm going to hang out here for a few minutes just to make sure that everybody gets started. But then you're going to take the assessment. That's going to be the next hour. And then when you come back, we're going to roll into some actual material. Okay. So go do it. I'll put a timer up. We're back at 10:30. You've got basically now 59 minutes to run through this assessment, 25 questions. Okay, go for it. And we'll see you in a bit. If you have any questions at all, know that I'm still here, but I am going to go off a video, but I'll have my headset on. Okay.